Welcome to your Q&A review for the WGU Organizational Behavior exam. We'll tackle real exam-style questions explaining right answers, wrong ones, and the theory behind them. Today's focus, Domain 1, personality and individual differences, including person-environment fit and Holland's theory, personality traits and measurement, the Big Five and Hexaco, the Dark Triad, self-monitoring and situation strength. Our website offers free exam guides and practice questions to help you ace your C715 exam. You'll find the link right in the description below, so go ahead and check it out. Take advantage of these resources and remember, it's all about studying smarter, not harder. Alright, let's get started. Question 1. A fast-growing software startup expects employees to switch projects and shift roles every few months as priorities change. Rather than screening applicants for one fixed set of job tasks, the hiring team focuses on whether each candidate's personal values align with the company's collaborative, mission-driven culture. Which type of fit is the hiring team prioritizing? Your options are A. Person-job fit, B. Person-group fit, C. Person-organization fit, D. Person-supervisor fit. Which one is it? Pause the video if you need more time. The correct answer is C. Person-organization fit. C is correct because person-organization fit is the match between a person's values and the overall culture and values of the organization. When roles change constantly, cultural and value alignment matters more than fit to any single job, which is exactly what the hiring team is screening for. A is wrong because person-job fit matches a person to the requirements and tasks of one specific job. The startup is deliberately not hiring for a fixed set of tasks, so this is not the focus. B is wrong because person-group fit concerns how well someone meshes with a specific team's interaction dynamics. The scenario describes alignment with the whole company culture, not one team. D is wrong because person-supervisor fit concerns compatibility between an employee and their direct manager. The scenario says nothing about matching candidates to a particular boss. Person-organization fit is about how well your values match a company's culture as a whole, not how well you match one specific job. Researchers describe this through a cycle called attraction, selection, and attrition. People are drawn to organizations that share their values. Those organizations select people who already fit, and misfits eventually leave, pushing the whole workforce toward shared values. As roles shift and teams reorganize in fast-changing markets, employers care less about narrow task mastery and more about whether someone shares the mission. A strong value match reliably predicts high job satisfaction, high organizational commitment, and low turnover. The key distinction exam writers test is person-organization fit versus person-job fit. Organization fit is about values and culture across the whole enterprise, while job fit, rooted in Holland's vocational theory, stays within the boundaries of one role. Whenever a scenario highlights shifting roles, mission, or shared culture, think person-organization fit. When it highlights specific tasks or occupational interests, think person-job fit. Question 2. A career counselor administers an inventory of 160 occupational titles, asks the client to mark the ones they like and dislike, and uses the resulting interest profile to recommend occupations that match the client's personality. Which theory is the counselor applying? Your options are A. Holland's personality job fit theory, B. The attraction, selection, attrition framework of person-organization fit, C. Situation strength theory, D. Trait activation theory. Take a second. Which answer would you pick? The correct answer is A. Holland's personality job fit theory. A is correct because Holland's personality job fit theory uses the vocational preference inventory of 160 occupational titles to build interest profiles and match 6 personality types to congruent occupations. The counselor's method matches this theory exactly. B is wrong because attraction, selection, attrition describes person-organization fit, where people are drawn to and retained by organizations matching their values. It does not use an occupational interest inventory to match people to specific jobs. C is wrong because situation strength theory explains when personality predicts behavior based on how strongly a setting dictates conduct. It is not a tool for matching people to occupations. D is wrong because trait activation theory explains how certain situations switch on specific traits. It does not describe vocational interest matching. Person-job fit is the match between what a job requires and who a person is. John Holland's personality job fit theory is the most proven account of this idea, arguing that satisfaction and turnover depend on how closely personality matches the occupational environment. Holland proposed 6 personality types, spelling the word RASEC, realistic, investigative, artistic, social, enterprising, and conventional. Each type gravitates toward congruent occupations, and adjacent types resemble each other while opposite types, like realistic and social, differ sharply on his hexagon. Holland's questionnaire, the vocational preference inventory, lists 160 occupational titles for respondents to mark as liked or disliked. The resulting pattern forms an occupational interest profile that points toward congruent, satisfying work. Picture a methodical, detail-oriented client. An inventory points them toward conventional work like accounting, where they'll feel satisfied and stay, placed instead in an ambiguous, artistic role. That same person would likely feel friction and start looking elsewhere. Person-job fit strongly predicts satisfaction, commitment, and lower turnover, ranking among the strongest predictors of positive work outcomes. Just remember, if the scenario matches a person to an occupation, it's Holland and person-job fit, not the values and culture story of person-organization fit. Question 3. An employee strongly prefers orderly, rule-regulated and unambiguous tasks. She is most comfortable following established procedures, keeping precise records, and working within clear structure, and she dislikes open-ended creative assignments. Which of Holland's 6 personality types does she best represent? Your options are A. Realistic, B. Conventional, C. Artistic, D. Investigative. Before I reveal it, which one do you think is right? The correct answer is B. Conventional. B is correct because the conventional type prefers rule-regulated, orderly, and unambiguous activities and is described as conforming, efficient, and practical. The employee's love of structure, procedures, and precise records is the textbook profile, matching occupations like accountant or file clerk. And was wrong because the realistic type prefers physical activities requiring skill, strength, and coordination, such as mechanic or assembly line work. The scenario describes office record keeping, not hands-on physical work. C is wrong because the artistic type prefers ambiguous, unsystematic activities that allow creative expression. That is the opposite of the employee, who dislikes open-ended creative assignments. D is wrong because the investigative type prefers thinking, organizing, and understanding through analysis and curiosity. The scenario emphasizes following procedures rather than independent investigation. Holland's typology sorts vocational personalities into 6 types, each matched to occupations where that type of person tends to thrive. People are most satisfied and most likely to stay when their daily work matches what their personality actually prefers. The realistic type likes hands-on physical work. The investigative type likes analysis and research. The artistic type likes creative, unstructured work, and the social type likes helping others. The enterprising type likes persuading and leading, while the conventional type likes order, rules, and procedure. Holland arranged these 6 types around a hexagon to show how alike or different they are. Adjacent types share traits, but types on opposite corners contrast sharply, which is why a hands-on realistic person rarely thrives in a people-developing social role. And the reverse holds too. The conventional type is the one most often tested, described as conforming, efficient, practical, and sometimes inflexible, thriving as accountants, administrators, or records clerks. Watch for language about order, procedure, and discomfort with ambiguity, and don't confuse it with investigative curiosity or artistic creativity. Anchoring on whether someone seeks structure or seeks novelty is what separates the conventional type from the rest of Holland 6. Question 4. A project lead is assembling a cross-functional team whose members will collaborate closely every day, and she is most concerned with how well each new member's working style will mesh with the existing team's interaction dynamics. Which dimension of fit is most relevant to her concern? Your options are A. Person-job fit, B. Person-organization fit, C. Person-supervisor fit, D. Person-group fit. What's your answer? Commit to one before I continue. The correct answer is D. Person-group fit. D is correct because person-group fit is the dimension that matters most in team settings, where team interaction dynamics strongly shape work outcomes. The project lead's focus on how members mesh with the existing team is precisely person-group fit. A is wrong because person-job fit concerns the match between a person and the tasks of a specific job, not how well teammates work together. B is wrong because person-organization fit concerns alignment between an individual's values and the broader organizational culture, not the dynamics of one team. C is wrong because person-supervisor fit concerns compatibility between an employee and their direct manager. The scenario emphasizes peers on a team, not the boss. Person-job and person-organization fit get most of the attention, but 2 more dimensions matter for predicting workplace outcomes. Together, all 4 form a family called person-environment fit. Person-group fit describes how well someone meshes with a specific team, while person-supervisor fit describes compatibility with a direct manager. Each captures a slice of work life that job and organization fit alone can miss. Person-group fit matters most where teams drive results, since a mismatched rhythm or communication style can disrupt a team even if the newcomer has the right skills. Person-supervisor fit matters because the daily relationship with a manager colors satisfaction and performance, and research shows that congruence between a leader's and follower's outlook can even predict how the follower performs. The umbrella term person-environment fit recognizes that a person sits inside several overlapping environments at once: the job, the organization, the team, and the supervisor. A meta-analysis across East Asia, Europe, and North America found organization and job fit are the strongest predictors, with group and supervisor fit adding further explanatory power. When a scenario centers on meshing with teammates, think person-group fit. When it centers on the boss, think person-supervisor fit. Save person-environment fit for when the question asks for the term, covering all 4. Question 5. A manager opening a new office in a strongly collectivistic country wonders whether to redesign each role around the individual strengths of new hires, as the company does at its headquarters in a highly individualistic country. Based on research about culture and person-job fit, what is the best guidance? Your options are in collectivistic cultures, person-job fit is a weaker predictor of satisfaction, So the manager should select people who will thrive in jobs that are already structured, rather than redesign jobs around individuals. B. In collectivistic cultures, person-job fit predicts satisfaction more strongly, so jobs should be tailored even more aggressively to each individual. C. Culture has no measurable effect on the relationship between person-job fit and satisfaction, so the same approach works everywhere. D. The manager should abandon person-job fit entirely and rely only on physical ability testing. Pick one. Trust your gut. Here's your chance to test yourself. The correct answer is A. In collectivistic cultures, person-job fit is a weaker predictor of satisfaction, so the manager should select people who will thrive in jobs that are already structured, rather than redesign jobs around individuals. A is correct because in collectivistic cultures, workers do not expect jobs to be tailored to them, so person-job fit predicts satisfaction less strongly. The better strategy is to select people who will thrive in already structured roles rather than redesign each job around the person. B is wrong because this reverses the research. Tailoring jobs to individuals raises satisfaction mainly in individualistic cultures, where workers expect to be heard, not in collectivistic ones. C is wrong because culture clearly moderates the effect. Person-job fit is a stronger predictor of satisfaction in individualistic settings, and a weaker one in collectivistic settings, so a single approach is not equally effective. D is wrong because physical ability testing addresses stamina and strength, not the cultural fit between a person and a structured role. Abandoning person-job fit for ability testing does not follow from the research. Does tailoring a job to a person always boost satisfaction? Not quite. The answer depends heavily on the surrounding culture. In individualistic cultures, workers expect their preferences to be heard, so shaping a job around personal strengths raises satisfaction. In collectivistic cultures, employees expect to fit into an existing structure, so that same tailoring matters far less. The guidance flips with context. In individualistic settings, managers boost satisfaction through job redesign, while in collectivistic settings, they achieve fit through careful selection instead. A related nuance is age. Job crafting helps older workers more, since they've had more time to discover their own strengths. Picture a company with headquarters in an individualistic country opening a branch in a collectivistic one. Letting employees redesign roles works great at headquarters, but copying that approach abroad would likely fall flat. The branch does better by hiring people suited to its already well-structured roles. Person-job fit isn't a universal lever. It predicts satisfaction more strongly in individualistic cultures and more weakly in collectivistic ones. So smart managers shift between redesigning jobs and carefully selecting people. Question 6. An organizational psychologist explains that one characteristic is far more useful than another for describing a particular employee because it shows up the same way, again and again, both over many years and across very different situations. Which principle about personality traits is the psychologist describing? Your options are: A trait is more descriptive of a person when it appears only in stressful situations. B. Traits are equally important regardless of how often or how consistently they appear. C. The more consistent a characteristic is over time and the more frequently it appears across situations, the more important the trait is in describing the person. D. A characteristic counts as a trait only if it can be changed easily through training. Which would you go with? Lock it in before the reveal. The correct answer is C. The more consistent a characteristic is over time, and the more frequently it appears across situations, the more important the trait is in describing the person. C is correct because personality traits are enduring characteristics that describe behavior, And the more consistent a characteristic is over time, and the more frequently it shows up across situations, the more important it is for describing the person. That is exactly the principle being explained. A is wrong because traits are defined by consistency and frequency across many situations, not by appearing only under stress. A characteristic limited to stressful moments would be less descriptive, not more. B is wrong because consistency and frequency are precisely what make a trait more or less important. So traits are not equally important regardless of those qualities. D is wrong because traits are relatively stable and enduring, not characteristics defined by how easily they can be trained away. Ease of change is not part of the definition. Personality is the sum of how a person reacts to and interacts with the world, described through measurable traits. But with hundreds of adjectives people use to describe each other, how do we know which traits actually matter? Two qualities determine how useful a trait is. First, consistency over time. The characteristic recurs year after year. Second, frequency across situations. It shows up across many different contexts, not just one isolated setting. Think of a trait like a signature that appears again and again across many pages of a person's life, rather than a single smudge on one page. Organizations want to predict behavior, and only something stable and recurring can forecast how someone will act in a new team or under new pressure. Consider one analyst described two ways. A colleague who saw irritability during a single deadline crunch is describing a momentary state. A colleague who saw dependable, thorough work on every project for years is describing a genuine trait, conscientiousness. Personality is the stable, recurring signature of how a person engages the world. A trait matters because it is consistent over time and frequent across situations, not because it appears once under stress. Question 7. A candidate completing a personality questionnaire as part of a job application rates herself far higher on conscientiousness than she did when she took the same questionnaire privately to learn about herself. Which well-known weakness of self-report personality surveys does this illustrate? Your options are A. Disparate impact against protected groups. B. Faking, where respondents inflate desirable traits when scores affect hiring. C. Low test-retest reliability caused by random mood swings. D. The tendency for vague feedback to feel personally accurate. Don't overthink it. Which one feels right? The correct answer is B. Faking, where respondents inflate desirable traits when scores affect hiring. B is correct because faking is the tendency for people to rate themselves higher on desirable traits, such as conscientiousness, when they know the scores will be used for hiring. The candidate's inflated self-rating under application conditions is the classic example. A is wrong because disparate impact refers to selection practices that disproportionately screen out protected groups, a concern raised about ability testing, not the deliberate inflation of self-ratings. C is wrong because test-retest reliability concerns whether scores stay stable across administrations in general. Here the change is driven by the hiring stakes, not random mood variation, which points specifically to faking. D is wrong because accepting vague, general descriptions as uniquely accurate is a criticism aimed at instruments like the MBTI, not the deliberate inflation of self-reported traits during hiring. Self-report surveys are the most common way organizations measure personality because they're cheap, fast, and let a company screen thousands of applicants at once. But that convenience comes with a well-known weakness that every careful manager has to account for. When people know their scores affect a hiring decision, they rate themselves higher on desirable traits, like conscientiousness, than they would answering the same survey just for themselves. This is not necessarily deliberate lying, it's a pull toward presenting an ideal self that inflates the scores. Exam writers test whether you can spot faking, specifically scores rising under hiring conditions. This is different from ordinary unreliability, which is just random drift, not a directional, stakes-driven push. Self-reports also cap out at the limits of a person's own self-knowledge, which is a separate weakness. Picture an applicant scoring near the top on a conscientiousness inventory during a job application, then scoring noticeably lower months later, taking the identical test out of personal curiosity. Her personality didn't change, the incentive did. The signal words to watch for are self-rating, scores used for hiring, and inflated desirable traits. Faking is the single biggest threat to the validity of self-report personality measurement in selection. Question 8. A selection specialist wants the most accurate prediction of how well applicants will actually perform on the job. Based on research comparing personality measurement approaches, which strategy should she choose? Your options are: A. Rely solely on applicants' self-report surveys, since people know themselves best. B. Rely solely on a single stranger's brief observation during the interview. C. Replace personality measurement entirely with the applicant's years of experience. D. Combine self-report surveys with observer ratings, since the two together predict performance better than either alone. Got a guess? Lock it in? The correct answer is D. Combine self-report surveys with observer ratings, since the two together predict performance better than either alone. D is correct because research shows observer ratings predict job success better than self-ratings alone, and combining self-report with observer ratings predicts performance better than either method by itself. The specialist should use both together. A is wrong because self-reports alone are vulnerable to faking and are weaker predictors of job success than observer ratings, so relying on them by themselves is not the most accurate approach. B is wrong because a rating from someone who barely knows the applicant is less accurate than one from a person who knows them well, so a single stranger's brief impression is a weak basis for prediction. C is wrong because years of experience is not a personality measurement method, and the research question concerns how to measure personality most accurately, which is best done by combining self-reports and observer ratings. Self-reports aren't the only way to measure personality. Having a co-worker or someone who knows the person well rate their traits offers an independent, outside perspective that self-view can't provide. Self-reports are vulnerable to faking and limited self-insight, especially under hiring pressure. Observers, by contrast, have no incentive to inflate someone's desirable traits, which is why research shows observer ratings actually predict job success better than self-ratings alone. Self-reports and observer ratings are strongly correlated, but each captures something the other misses. The self-report reveals inner tendencies. The observer reveals how those tendencies actually show up in behavior, and together they triangulate the trait. Not all observers are equally accurate. Someone who has known the person a long time beats a near stranger's first impression, and emotionally intelligent raters who pick up on specific emotional cues judge certain traits, like stability or extroversion, more precisely. The best measurement design never relies on self-report alone or a stranger's brief impression alone. It pairs an applicant's self-view with ratings from people who've actually worked with them, because the two sources correct each other's errors. Question 9. A testing vendor markets a new personality assessment that uses machine learning to choose the most informative questions for each respondent, flag likely fakers, and even infer traits from the language people use on social media. Which development in personality measurement does this product represent? Your options are the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning to improve personality assessment. B. A return to traditional paper and pencil self-report surveys. C. Observer ratings collected from long-time co-workers. D. Holland's vocational preference inventory delivered online. Which one is it? Pause the video if you need more time. The correct answer is A. The use of artificial intelligence and machine learning to improve personality assessment. A is correct because modern artificial intelligence and machine learning improve scoring, reduce faking, adaptively present items, detect fakers, and even measure personality from social media language. The product's features map directly onto this approach. B is wrong because traditional paper and pencil self-report surveys do not adaptively select items or analyze social media language. The product is explicitly using machine learning, which is the opposite of the older static format. C is wrong because observer ratings come from human co-workers giving an independent assessment, not from algorithms selecting item and analyzing online language. D is wrong because the vocational preference inventory is Holland's list of occupational titles for matching interest to jobs. It is not a machine learning system for detecting fakers or reading social media language. Alongside self-reports and observer ratings, a third force has entered personality measurement, artificial intelligence and machine learning. These systems don't replace trait theory. They sharpen how it's applied, changing how items are delivered, how personality is assessed, and how fakers are caught. Machine learning contributes in three key ways. First, adaptive item selection tailors each question to the respondent, reaching an accurate score with fewer items. Second, algorithms trained on response patterns flag likely fakers who inflate desirable traits. Third, models infer personality traits directly from language. A striking contribution is measuring personality from language people actually produce. Models read patterns of expression in social media posts and job applicant essays, extracting personality signals from free text rather than from rating scales. This technology exists because of a persistent gap. Organizations want accurate, fake-resistant measurement at scale, but faking limited self-insight, and costly observer ratings held traditional methods back. Machine learning stepped in to close that gap. When a scenario mentions adaptive item selection, automated faking detection, or trait inference from social media or essays, that signals the artificial intelligence approach, not a paper questionnaire and not a human observer's rating. Question 10. Reviewing several years of assessment data, an analyst notices that employees' Big Five scores stay relatively steady over time, with only minor day-to-day variation. Which explanation about the origins of personality best accounts for this stability? Your options are: what? Personality is determined entirely by the immediate work situation and changes whenever the situation changes. B. Personality is fixed at birth and cannot be influenced by culture or environment at all. C. Personality is shaped substantially by heredity, which makes traits relatively stable and enduring over a person's life. D. Personality scores are stable only because the assessments are scored incorrectly. Take a second. Which answer would you pick? The correct answer is C. Personality is shaped substantially by heredity, which makes traits relatively stable and enduring over a person's life. C is correct because personality is inherited to a meaningful degree, which is why traits are relatively stable and enduring over an individual's life, with some daily variation. Heredity is the standard explanation for the steadiness the analyst observes. A is wrong because if personality were determined entirely by the immediate situation, scores would swing constantly rather than remain steady. Stability over years argues against a purely situational explanation. B is wrong because although heredity sets a range, culture and environment still shape how personality is expressed. So it is inaccurate to say environment has no influence at all. D is wrong because stable scores across years reflect the genuine endurance of traits, not a scoring error. Nothing in the data suggests the assessments were miscalculated. Personality is shaped by two forces working together, heredity and environment. Understanding how they interact explains why traits stay stable, yet still bend to circumstances. Heredity is the inherited component of personality, giving each trait a baseline range, like sociability or conscientiousness, that doesn't disappear when circumstances change. Environment and culture then shape how that trait actually shows up day to day. Think of heredity as a thermostat setting. It defines a range the trait operates within. The situation nudges the temperature up or down a little, but it can't rewrite the underlying setting. This is why an analyst reviewing years of assessment data sees scores barely move. The inherited baseline holds steady, while only minor day-to-day wobble reflects the ordinary influence of changing situations. The right answer is never pure nature or pure nurture. Genetics sets the range, and the environment shapes how a trait is expressed within it. Question 11. A training facilitator describes a popular instrument that sorts people using for either-or preferences and combines one pole from each pair to place each person into one of 16 types. Which assessment is the facilitator describing? Your options are the Big Five model, B, the Myers-Briggs type indicator, C, the dark triad inventory, D, the Wonderlic ability test. Before I reveal it, which one do you think is right? The correct answer is B, the Myers-Briggs type indicator. B is correct because the Myers-Briggs type indicator taps 4 characteristics: extroversion, introversion, sensing, intuition, thinking, feeling, and judging, perceiving, and combines one pole from each pair to classify people into one of 16 types. That is exactly the instrument described. A is wrong because the Big Five model uses 5 continuous dimensions rather than 4 either-or pairs, and it does not sort people into a fixed set of 16 types. C is wrong because the dark triad describes 3 undesirable traits: Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy. It is not a 4-preference typing system. D is wrong because the Wonderlic is a brief intelligence test measuring reasoning ability, not a personality typology that produces 16 types. The Myers-Briggs type indicator is the world's most widely used personality test, sorting people into one of 16 types based on a questionnaire of about 100 items. Instead of a score, it hands you a label. The instrument rests on 4 either-or dichotomies: extroversion versus introversion, sensing versus intuition, thinking versus feeling, and judging versus perceiving. Each pair forces a choice between 2 opposite poles. The test takes one pole from each of the 4 pairs and combines them into a single type, like introverted, intuitive, thinking, and judging, labeled the visionary. 4 dichotomies with 2 poles each multiply out to 16 possible combinations. The nuance to catch is the structure itself. 4 either-or preferences combined into 16 fixed types. The Big Five, by contrast, scores people along 5 continuous sliding scales rather than sorting them into boxes. And that boxes versus scales distinction is the cleanest way to tell them apart. Whenever a scenario mentions 4 preferences, 16 types, or a 4-letter code, that's the Myers-Briggs at work, not the Big Five or the dark triad. Question 12. A CEO proposes using Myers-Briggs results as a pre-employment screen, hiring only applicants whose types he believes suit each role. An evidence-based HR director objects. What is the strongest research-based reason the director can give against this plan? Your options are: A. The Myers-Briggs takes far too long for applicants to complete during hiring. B. The Myers-Briggs measures physical abilities that are irrelevant to office work. C. The Myers-Briggs is illegal to administer to job applicants in any setting. D. The Myers-Briggs does not predict job performance, so it is not a valid basis for selection. What's your answer? Commit to one before I continue. The correct answer is D. The Myers-Briggs does not predict job performance, so it is not a valid basis for selection. D is correct because the central evidence-based objection is that the Myers-Briggs does not predict job performance or other important organizational outcomes, which makes it an unsupported tool for hiring. The textbook recommends the Big Five for selection instead. A is wrong because length is not the core problem, even if the instrument was short. Its failure to predict performance would still make it unsuitable for selection. B is wrong because the Myers-Briggs measures personality preferences, not physical abilities. So describing it as a physical ability test misstates what it does. C is wrong because the instrument is not illegal to administer. The objection is about validity for selection, not legality. The Myers-Briggs is wildly popular, but for hiring decisions, popularity doesn't matter. What matters is whether a tool can predict job performance, and the Myers-Briggs simply cannot. Selection is fundamentally about prediction. Any hiring assessment should forecast how someone will perform before they start. If a personality measure shows no reliable link to performance, using it only adds noise and can screen out capable candidates. The Big Five, especially conscientiousness, actually predicts job performance across many roles. A common trap is trusting validity claims from the instrument's own publisher rather than independent researchers. Publishers may insist their tool is valid, reliable, and that all types are equal, but that's marketing, not peer-reviewed evidence. The independent research record runs largely against the Myers-Briggs. Picture a CEO who loves his own Myers-Briggs result and wants to screen every applicant by type. An evidence-based HR director should object on the firmest ground. The instrument doesn't predict job performance, so building selection around it is unsupported. The director then points toward the Big Five instead. The Myers-Briggs may be the most popular personality test in the world, but because it fails to predict job performance, it should not be used to decide who gets hired. Question 13. Two colleagues take the Myers-Briggs and complain about two things. First, that each of them is forced to be labeled as either introverted or extroverted with no middle ground. And second, that when one retakes the test a few weeks later, she is sorted into a different type. Which two recognized weaknesses of the instrument are they describing? Your options are A. It forces people into false either or categories, and it is unreliable because retakers often get different results. B. It has unscientific origins in Jung's theories, and it fails to predict job performance. C. It is too expensive to administer, and it requires a licensed clinician to score. D. It measures intelligence rather than personality, and it shows disparate impact. Pick one. Trust your gut. Here's your chance to test yourself. The correct answer is A. It forces people into false either or categories, and it is unreliable because retakers often get different results. A is correct because two documented weaknesses of the Myers-Briggs are that it forces people into either or types with no in-between, and that it is unreliable because people who retake it frequently receive different results. Those are precisely the two complaints described. B is wrong because unscientific Jungian origins and failure to predict performance are also real criticisms, but they are not the two issues the colleagues raised, which were the forced either-or labels and the changed retest result. C is wrong because cost and a clinician requirement are not the recognized weaknesses at issue here, and they do not match the two complaints in the scenario. D is wrong because the Myers-Briggs is a personality typology, not an intelligence test, and disparate impact is a concern raised about ability testing, so neither matches the colleague's complaints. Beyond its weak link to performance, the Myers-Briggs suffers from two measurement flaws that undercut it as a description of personality: false either-or categories and poor test-retest reliability. Both trace back to one decision sorting a continuous reality into fixed boxes. In reality, personality traits spread along continuous dimensions, with most people clustered somewhere in the middle rather than at the extremes. The Myers-Briggs ignores that middle, forcing every person into introvert or extrovert, thinking or feeling, with no in-between. A person sitting almost exactly on the boundary still gets shoved to one side, creating a false either-or. And because so many people sit near that boundary, a small shift in mood can flip a borderline preference. So a second sitting yields a different type. Picture the trait as a spectrum with a cut-off line straight through the crowded middle. Anyone near that line gets shoved into one box or the other, which is why a tiny shift in mood or interpretation can flip their label type entirely. A trait worth measuring is continuous and stable, and the Myers-Briggs honors neither property. That's why its four-letter types misdescribe people and fail to hold up on a second try. Question 14. A psychology professor criticizes a widely used personality instrument by pointing out that it was built in a subjective way on the neo-Freudian ideas of a theorist who never collected empirical data. Which instrument and which underlying problem is the professor highlighting? Your options are A. The Big Five, whose dimensions lack any research support. B. The Wonderlic, whose questions were never validated. C. The Myers-Briggs, whose foundation rests on Carl Jung's unscientific theories. D. The Hexaco, whose sixth dimension was invented arbitrarily. Which would you go with? Lock it in before the reveal. The correct answer is C. The Myers-Briggs, whose foundation rests on Carl Jung's unscientific theories. C is correct because the Myers-Briggs was built subjectively on Carl Jung's neo-Freudian theories, and critics note that Jung was not an empiricist and did not collect data. That unscientific origin is the problem the professor is highlighting. A is wrong because the Big Five rests on decades of solid empirical research, so describing it as lacking research support is incorrect. B is wrong because the Wonderlic is a validated intelligence test that gives useful information cheaply, not an instrument criticized for unscientific Freudian roots. D is wrong because the Hexaco's sixth dimension, honesty-humility, emerged from cross-cultural research rather than being invented arbitrarily, so this does not match the criticism. One of the oldest criticisms of the Myers-Briggs isn't about its results, but about where it came from in the first place. The instrument rests on Carl Jung's neo-Freudian ideas, and Jung was not an empiricist. He never collected data or tested his theories against evidence. Then the people who built the actual questionnaire had no formal training in measurement science, translating Jung's categories through intuition rather than rigorous test development. One critic put it bluntly, you might as well read a horoscope, which is just as valid and takes less time. A measure can only be as trustworthy as the theory and methods behind it, and here both were subjective from the start. Picture the structure itself. Jung's untested theory forms the foundation, and on top of it sits a questionnaire built without rigorous validation. Every weakness at the base carries upward into the finished tool. When a question points to Jung or a theorist who never gathered evidence, it's testing this origins critique specifically, not the separate problems of false dichotomies or poor retest reliability. The Myers-Briggs was built on untested theory by untrained hands, and that's why scientists still view it with suspicion. Question 15. Despite weak scientific support, the Myers-Briggs remains enormously popular. A manager asks why it endures and what she should use instead when making hiring decisions. Which response best reflects the textbook's position? Your options are A. It endures because it strongly predicts performance, so she should keep using it for hiring. B. It endures partly because its non-judgmental results feel appealing and flattering, but for selection she should use the Big Five, which has strong evidence. C. It endures because it is the only validated personality test, so no alternative exists. D. It endures because regulators require it, so she must use it regardless of evidence. Don't overthink it. Which one feels right? The correct answer is B. It endures partly because its non-judgmental results feel appealing and flattering, but for selection she should use the Big Five, which has strong evidence. B is correct because historians argue the Myers-Briggs endures because it is written to be so non-judgmental that every result feels desirable and appealing, satisfying a desire for simple self-knowledge. Because its results are unrelated to performance, the textbook recommends the evidence-based Big Five for selection. A is wrong because the Myers-Briggs does not strongly predict performance, so its popularity cannot be attributed to predictive power, and it should not be relied on for hiring. C is wrong because it is not the only validated test. The Big Five is far better validated, so the claim that no alternative exists is false. D is wrong because no regulator requires the Myers-Briggs. Its persistence comes from its appealing, flattering results, not a legal mandate. Myers-Briggs is scientifically weak on nearly every count, yet it's the most popular personality test in the world. Understanding why reveals something important about human psychology, not measurement. The instrument's descriptions are written to be non-judgmental, so every result feels desirable. No type is framed as bad, so people walk away pleased with their label, wanting to believe it and share it. Historians argue its staying power comes from flattering, non-judgmental descriptions that satisfy a deep appetite for simple self-knowledge. It succeeds as a self-image product, even as it fails as a measurement. For decisions that actually matter, the evidence points elsewhere. The Big Five rests on decades of research, with conscientiousness predicting performance across most jobs, making it the defensible choice for hiring. The Myers-Briggs thrives because it tells people a pleasant story about themselves, while the Big Five earns its place wherever an organization needs measurement it can trust. Question 16. Within the Big Five, one dimension captures whether a person tends to be calm, self-confident, and secure rather than nervous, anxious, and insecure, and it taps the ability to withstand stress. Which Big Five dimension is this? Your options are A. Conscientiousness, B. Agreeableness, C. Openness to experience, D. Emotional stability. Got a guess? Lock it in. The correct answer is D. Emotional stability. D is correct because emotional stability is the Big Five dimension describing someone as calm, self-confident, and secure at the positive pole versus nervous, anxious, and insecure at the negative pole, and it taps the ability to withstand stress. That matches the description exactly. A is wrong because conscientiousness describes being responsible, dependable, persistent, and organized. It concerns reliability and discipline, not calmness under stress. B is wrong because agreeableness describes being good-natured, cooperative, and trusting. It concerns warmth toward others, not emotional steadiness. C is wrong because openness to experience describes imagination, curiosity, and sensitivity. It concerns receptiveness to new ideas, not the ability to withstand stress. Emotional stability is the Big Five dimension describing how calm, self-confident, and secure a person is versus nervous, anxious, and insecure. It's about the capacity to withstand stress and stay composed under pressure. Someone can be conscientious, agreeable, open, and extroverted, yet still be gripped by anxiety. Emotional stability fills that gap, capturing how people handle strain, setbacks, and uncertainty that the other traits miss. Picture this as one spectrum with two poles. On one end sits calm, secure, and composed. On the other sits nervous, anxious, and insecure, often labeled neuroticism. Think of an operations lead who keeps a level head during a plant emergency while colleagues panic, then reports high satisfaction and low stress afterward. That steadiness under acute pressure is the signature of emotional stability, and it predicts they'll weather future crises just as well. Emotional stability is the Big Five stress and mood dimension, driving less catastrophizing and faster recovery from setbacks. Its clearest payoff is satisfaction and resilience, not task performance itself. Question 17. A hiring committee wants to select for the single Big Five trait that best predicts job performance across the widest range of jobs because it captures effort, persistence, organization, and discipline. Which trait should they prioritize? Your options are A. Extroversion, B. Agreeableness, C. Conscientiousness, D. Openness to experience. Which one is it? Pause the video if you need more time. The correct answer is C. Conscientiousness. C is correct because conscientiousness is the strongest Big Five predictor of job performance across most jobs, because conscientious people bring greater effort, persistence, organization, and discipline. It is the trait the committee should prioritize. A is wrong because extroversion predicts leadership emergence and strong interpersonal performance, but it is not the best across-the-board predictor of job performance. B is wrong because agreeableness predicts being well-liked and performing well in service roles, but it is not the strongest general predictor of performance, and very agreeable people may bargain less assertively. D is wrong because openness predicts creativity and adaptability, which matter most in changing or creative roles, but it does not predict performance across the widest range of jobs as conscientiousness does. Conscientiousness describes people who are responsible, dependable, persistent, and organized. It measures personal consistency and reliability, capturing how well someone plans, follows through, and holds themselves to commitments. Conscientiousness is the strongest Big Five predictor of job performance across the widest range of jobs, and no other trait forecasts performance so broadly. That's because it bundles effort, persistence, organization, and discipline, qualities that help in accounting, nursing, sales, or management alike. Exam writers test whether you can distinguish conscientiousness from traits tied to narrower outcomes. Extroversion predicts leadership emergence. Openness predicts creativity. Agreeableness predicts being liked. And emotional stability predicts satisfaction. But only conscientiousness is the across-the-board performance workhorse. Imagine a hiring committee betting on one trait when future roles are uncertain. The defensible choice is conscientiousness, since diligence and organization travel well into almost any assignment. Though at extremes, it can slide into rigidity and reduced adaptability. Watch for signal words like responsible, dependable, persistent, organized, and discipline tied to strong performance. Conscientiousness is the Big Five's best general predictor of job performance, a fact worth memorizing since exam writers return to it again and again. Question 18. On a project team, the member who is sociable, gregarious, and assertive is consistently the one others begin to look to and treat as the informal leader. Which Big Five trait most strongly predicts this tendency to emerge as a leader? Your options are A. Extroversion, B. Conscientiousness, C. Emotional stability, D. Agreeableness. Take a second. Which answer would you pick? The correct answer is A, extroversion. A is correct because extroversion, defined by being sociable, gregarious, and assertive, most strongly predicts leadership emergence, meaning who comes to be seen as a leader. The assertive, social member rising to informal leadership reflects this link. B is wrong because conscientiousness predicts strong task performance through effort and organization, but it is not the trait most associated with emerging as a leader in a group. C is wrong because emotional stability predicts job and life satisfaction and lowers stress, not the tendency to be seen as a leader. D is wrong because agreeableness predicts being well-liked and cooperative. But warmth alone does not drive leadership emergence the way assertive extroversion does. Extroversion is the big five trait describing someone sociable, gregarious, and assertive, capturing how a person approaches the social world. Extroverts feel and express positive emotions readily, seeking interaction and stimulation, while introverts are more reserved, timid, and quiet. Because extroverts speak up, engage others, and project confidence, they often become the person a team naturally starts to look to. This trait also supports stronger interpersonal performance and higher job and life satisfaction. A crucial distinction lies inside this finding. Extroversion predicts leadership emergence, who becomes seen as a leader, but not leadership effectiveness, how well that person actually leads. The talkative, assertive person may surface as leader without producing the best results. So emergence and effectiveness must be kept separate. Consider a project team with no assigned leader. Within a few weeks, the most gregarious, assertive member becomes the one others defer to as the de facto lead. That rise is leadership emergence, and extroversion is the trait that best predicts it. The signal words are sociable, gregarious, assertive, and emerging as a leader. Extroversion reliably predicts who steps forward as a leader, while how well they lead requires looking beyond this single trait. Question 19. A firm expanding overseas wants employees who generate creative solutions, adapt readily to change, and adjust comfortably to an unfamiliar culture with less stress. Which Big Five trait should the firm look for in candidates for these assignments? Your options are A. Conscientiousness, B. Openness to experience, C. Agreeableness, D. Emotional stability. Before I reveal it, which one do you think is right? The correct answer is B. Openness to experience. B is correct because openness to experience predicts creativity, flexibility, and better adaptation to change. And high openness is linked to less stress and better cultural adaptation when working in a new culture. It is the right trait for these overseas assignments. A is wrong because conscientiousness drives reliable, organized performance. But extreme conscientiousness can actually reduce adaptability to change rather than enhance it. C is wrong because agreeableness supports cooperation and being liked, but it is not the trait most tied to creativity and adapting to a new culture. D is wrong because emotional stability helps people withstand stress generally, but the specific outcomes of creativity, flexibility, and cultural adaptation are predicted by openness. Openness to experience is the Big Five trait built around imagination, curiosity, and sensitivity to new ideas. Open people are inventive and eager to try new things, while those low in openness prefer familiar routines over novelty. Openness predicts a cluster of related outcomes: higher creativity, better adaptation to change, stronger leadership through change, and comfort with ambiguity. Rigid, routine-preferring people lack exactly this comfort with the unfamiliar. The mechanism behind this is divergent, less conformist thinking. Open people generate unusual associations and aren't bound to how things have always been done. And that same divergence fuels both creativity and smoother adaptation to change. This shows up vividly in overseas work. High openness significantly reduces the stress of adjusting to a new culture. The curious, flexible person treats strangeness as something to explore rather than something to fear. Exam writers test whether you connect creativity, adaptability, and cultural adjustment to openness rather than its tempting neighbor. Extreme conscientiousness actually reduces adaptability. So any scenario about creative solutions, adapting to change, or thriving abroad points to openness. Question 20. A call center wants to staff customer-facing roles with people who are warm, cooperative, and trusting, expecting them to be better liked by customers and less prone to deviant behavior on the job. Which Big 5 trait best fits this hiring goal? Your options are A. Openness to experience, B. Extroversion, C. Conscientiousness, D. Agreeableness. What's your answer? Commit to one before I continue. The correct answer is D. Agreeableness. D is correct because agreeableness describes people who are good-natured, cooperative, and trusting. They tend to be better liked, perform well in interpersonally oriented jobs such as customer service, and show lower deviant behavior, which fits the call center's goal precisely. R is wrong because openness predicts creativity and adaptability, which are valuable in innovative roles, but are not the core qualities of warmth and cooperation sought for customer service. B is wrong because extroversion brings sociability and assertiveness and helps in interpersonal roles, but the specific qualities described, warmth and trust with lower deviance. Define agreeableness. C is wrong because conscientiousness brings dependability and discipline, but it does not specifically capture the warm, cooperative, well-liked profile the call center wants. Agreeableness is the Big 5 dimension of being good-natured, cooperative, and trusting. People high in it are warm and put harmony first, while those low on it are cold, antagonistic, and more competitive than cooperative. Agreeable people are better liked, and that likability shows up in real outcomes. They excel in interpersonally oriented jobs like customer service, comply more with rules and norms, and show lower deviant behavior, making them steady, low-risk team members. But agreeableness carries a trade-off. The same warmth that fuels cooperation can make someone a softer negotiator, less willing to push for their own interests, which is partly why highly agreeable people sometimes earn less than their more disagreeable peers. Exam writers test whether you tie warmth, likability, and low deviance to agreeableness rather than extroversion. Extroversion is about sociability and assertiveness, energized by stimulation, not warmth and trust, even though both traits can look similar in interpersonal work. Remember the signal words: good-natured, cooperative, trusting, well-liked, and customer service. Agreeableness is the Big 5's warmth and cooperation dimension, excelling in service and team settings while costing a little when it's time to negotiate. Question 21. A leadership researcher studies a constellation of 3 socially undesirable personality traits that exist to varying degrees in everyone, do not always occur together, and are not clinical disorders. The 3 are Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy. What is this constellation collectively called? Your options are A. The Dark Triad, B. The Big 5, C. The Hexaco model, D. Core self-evaluation. Pick one. Trust your gut. Here's your chance to test yourself. The correct answer is A. The Dark Triad. A is correct because the Dark Triad is the constellation of 3 negative personality traits consisting of Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy. The description of 3 undesirable non-clinical traits that vary across people matches it exactly. B is wrong because the Big Five consists of 5 broad, mostly neutral to positive dimensions describing total personality, not 3 socially undesirable traits. C is wrong because the Hexaco model is the Big Five plus a 6th honesty-humility dimension, not a grouping of 3 dark traits. D is wrong because core self-evaluation is a single attribute about a person's bottom-line sense of their own worth and competence, not a trio of undesirable traits. The dark triad is a cluster of 3 socially undesirable personality traits that organizations watch for, not select for. The 3 traits are Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy. They often travel together, but each one remains distinct. And unlike the Big Five, this framework isn't trying to map a whole personality. A crucial caveat: these are not clinical pathologies. Everyone carries these traits to some degree. They don't always occur together, and a high score on one may be low on the others. These traits can bring short-term wins, winning an argument, seizing an opportunity, projecting confidence. But sustained at high levels, they erode trust and judgment over time, and studies of hedge fund managers found the more narcissistic and psychopathic ones actually performed worse. When a scenario names Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy together as varying, non-clinical tendencies, it's describing the dark triad, not the Big Five or Hexaco. Question 22. A manager is pragmatic, keeps emotional distance from co-workers, and openly believes the ends justify the means, manipulating others to get ahead. He wins some short-term battles, yet he is not well liked and his overall job performance is only mediocre. Which dark triad trait does he most clearly exhibit? Your options are A. Narcissism, B. Psychopathy, C. Machiavellianism, D. Proactive personality. Which would you go with? Lock it in before the reveal. The correct answer is C. Machiavellianism. C is correct because Machiavellianism is the degree to which a person is pragmatic, maintains emotional distance, and believes ends justify means. High Macs manipulate to win short term, but are not well liked, and Machiavellianism does not positively predict overall job performance, which matches the manager exactly. A is wrong because narcissism centers on grandiosity, entitlement, and a need for admiration. The scenario stresses cold manipulation and an ends justify means philosophy rather than craving admiration. B is wrong because psychopathy centers on a lack of guilt or remorse and a lack of concern for others. The defining feature here is calculated manipulation for advantage, which is the Machiavellian signature. D is wrong because proactive personality is a positive attribute about taking initiative to create change, not a dark triad trait involving manipulation. Machiavellianism is the degree to which someone is pragmatic, emotionally distant, and believes the ends justify the means. High Macs treat people as instruments to manage, not relationships to honor, following a simple motto: if it works, use it. High Macs manipulate more, win more in the short term, and persuade others effectively while resisting persuasion themselves. Even their helpful citizenship behaviors are calculated moves for power, not sincere cooperation. Surprisingly, Machiavellianism does not predict strong overall job performance. High Macs win short-term skirmishes, but colleagues eventually see through the manipulation, and the lost trust undermines the very advancement they were chasing. Exam writers love testing the difference between Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy. Machiavellianism is cold, calculated manipulation toward a goal, not narcissism's craving for admiration, nor psychopathy's guiltless lack of concern. Picture a manager who manipulates office politics, believes the ends justify the means, yet performs only averagely and isn't liked. Manipulation with no real performance boost and low likability. That's Machiavellianism in textbook form. Question 23. An executive has a grandiose sense of self-importance, requires constant admiration, feels entitled to special treatment, and dismisses any feedback that challenges his inflated self-view. Which dark triad trait does he most clearly exhibit? Your options are A. Machiavellianism, B. Psychopathy, C. Honesty, humility, D. Narcissism. Don't overthink it. Which one feels right? The correct answer is D. Narcissism. D is correct because narcissism is the tendency to be arrogant, hold a grandiose sense of self-importance, require excessive admiration, and feel entitled. Narcissists also tune out conflicting feedback, which matches the executive's dismissal of anything challenging his self-view. A is wrong because Machiavellianism is defined by pragmatic manipulation and an ends justify means outlook, not by craving admiration and feeling entitled. B is wrong because psychopathy is defined by a lack of guilt and a lack of concern for others, not by grandiosity and a hunger for admiration. C is wrong because honesty, humility is the Hexaco dimension describing sincere, modest, and humble people. It is the opposite of grandiose narcissism and is not part of the dark triad. Narcissism is the tendency toward arrogance, a grandiose sense of self-importance, a need for excessive admiration, and a feeling of entitlement. The name comes from the Greek myth of Narcissus, who fell in love with his own reflection. The narcissistic signature is grandiosity, entitlement, a hunger for admiration, and dismissal of any feedback that punctures their self-image. This is different from the Machiavellian's instrumental manipulation or the psychopath's remorseless coldness. These three traits are often confused, but each has its own core. Narcissism is about a fragile, admiration-hungry self-image, not the cold calculation of Machiavellianism or the empathy-free ruthlessness of psychopathy. Narcissism strongly predicts counterproductive work behavior in individualistic cultures, but not in collectivistic ones, where group norms restrain it. Yet the trait isn't all liability. Narcissists are often charismatic and get chosen for leadership, and a medium rather than extreme. Dose actually correlates with leadership effectiveness. Narcissism couples a fragile, admiration-hungry self with genuine charisma. That's why a moderate amount can aid leadership, while a large, unchecked amount fuels entitlement, silences dissent, and drives counterproductive behavior. Question 24. An employee shows a striking lack of concern for how his actions affect others and feels no guilt or remorse when his decisions cause people harm. In the organizational behavior sense, and setting aside any clinical diagnosis, which dark triad trait does this describe? Your options are A. Machiavellianism, B. Psychopathy, C. Narcissism, D. Low-core self-evaluation. Got a guess? Lock it in. The correct answer is B. Psychopathy. B is correct because in organizational behavior, psychopathy is the tendency toward a lack of concern for others and a lack of guilt or remorse when actions cause harm. And the term here does not imply clinical mental illness. That is exactly what the employee shows. A is wrong because Machiavellianism centers on pragmatic, calculated manipulation to achieve goals, not on the absence of guilt when causing harm. C is wrong because narcissism centers on grandiosity, entitlement, and the need for admiration, which is different from a remorseless lack of concern for others. D is wrong because low-core self-evaluation describes people who doubt their own worth and competence, which is unrelated to a lack of guilt about harming others. In organizational behavior, psychopathy means something specific, a lack of concern for others and an absence of guilt or remorse when actions cause harm. It is not a clinical diagnosis, but a pattern of cold detachment that can show up in ordinary workplaces. Measures of workplace psychopathy assess a person's motivation to comply with norms, their impulsivity, their willingness to deceive, and their lack of empathy. Where most people are held back by guilt and concern for others, the high scorer feels no such break. Exam writers test whether you can tell this apart from its dark triad cousins. Machiavellianism centers on calculated manipulation, and narcissism centers on admiration seeking, but neither is defined by an absent conscience the way psychopathy is. The research linking psychopathy to job performance is inconsistent, unlike conscientiousness, which reliably predicts performance. But psychopathy does reliably show up in how power is pursued, through hard influence tactics like threats and manipulation, bullying, and inappropriate behavior in meetings. The defining signal is no guilt, no remorse, and no concern for harm done, with an explicit note that this is not clinical illness. Its effects on performance are too inconsistent to predict cleanly, but its link to hard, harmful tactics is reliable. Question 25. An organization worried about employees cutting corners and cheating wants a personality framework that adds a dimension specifically predicting ethical behavior, such as abstaining from cheating, to the standard 5. Which framework and dimension best meets this need? Your options are a Hexaco, which adds honesty, humility to the big 5. B, the dark triad, which adds Machiavellianism to the big 5. C, the MBTI, which adds a judging perceiving scale to the big 5. D, DSC, which adds dominance to the big 5. Which one is it? Pause the video if you need more time. The correct answer is A, Hexaco, which adds honesty, humility to the big 5. A is correct because Hexaco adds a 6th dimension, honesty, humility, to the big 5. People high in honesty, humility are sincere, fair, modest, and humble, and the dimension predicts ethically relevant outcomes such as abstaining from cheating, which is exactly what the organization needs. B is wrong because the dark triad is a set of undesirable traits, not an extension that predicts ethical behavior. And Machiavellianism is associated with unethical manipulation rather than integrity. C is wrong because the MBTI is a separate typology with weak validity, and its judging perceiving scale concerns structure versus spontaneity, not ethical behavior. It is not an add-on to the big 5. D is wrong because DISC is a circumplex types model with weak validity evidence, and its dominance dimension concerns assertiveness, not honesty or abstaining from cheating. Let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture behind this question, how Hexaco extends the big 5, and how it differs from a very different model called DSC. Hexaco takes the big 5 and adds a 6th dimension, honesty, humility, describing people who are sincere, fair, modest, and humble, uninterested in status or special privileges. This dimension emerged from cross-cultural research in languages like Korean and Hungarian that kept revealing a factor the English-centric Big 5 had missed. Its practical payoff is predictive power over ethical conduct, especially abstaining from cheating. DSC is a very different kind of framework, a circumplex model that arranges traits around a circle, so similar traits sit close together and dissimilar ones sit far apart. Like Myers-Briggs, it sorts people into types: dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness, while admitting people aren't truly confined to one type. Despite its popularity, few academic studies have tested its validity. Exam writers test whether you match the right framework to the right need. When a scenario wants a dimension that predicts ethical behavior, like curb and expense report fraud, Hexaco's honesty humility is the answer. When a scenario describes a circular types model with thin validity evidence, that's DISC. not the dark Triad or Myers-Briggs. Hexaco extends the Big Five toward integrity, giving organizations a direct handle on ethical conduct. DIAC, for all its popularity as a Myers-Briggs alternative, remains an under-examined types model that careful managers treat with caution. Question 26. An employee holds a positive bottom-line conclusion about her own capabilities, competence, and overall worth as a person. She likes herself and sees herself as effective and in control of her environment. Which individual difference attribute does this describe? Your options are A. Self-monitoring, B. Proactive personality, C. Core self-evaluation, D. Openness to experience. Take a second. Which answer would you pick? The correct answer is C. Core self-evaluation. C is correct because core self-evaluation is a set of bottom-line conclusions individuals hold about their capabilities, competence, and worth. People with positive core self-evaluations like themselves and see themselves as effective and in control, which matches the employee exactly. A is wrong because self-monitoring is about adjusting behavior to external situational cues, not about one's bottom-line sense of self-worth. B is wrong because proactive personality is about identifying opportunities and taking initiative to create change, not about overall self-evaluation. D is wrong because openness is a Big Five trait about imagination and curiosity, not a judgment about one's own competence and worth. Core self-evaluation is the bottom-line conclusion a person reaches about their own capabilities, competence, and worth. It's not a fleeting feeling about one task, but a deep, stable judgment about the self that a person carries from job to job. People with positive core self-evaluation see themselves as effective and in control, so they interpret their jobs as challenging and meaningful, which fuels satisfaction. Those with negative core self-evaluations feel self-doubt and powerlessness, so the very same role can feel discouraging. But this trait has a ceiling. Excessively high core self-evaluations can come across as self-importance, especially if the person seems unwilling to help others, so co-workers and supervisors may view it unfavorably at the extreme. The key exam distinction is between core self-evaluation and self-monitoring. Core self-evaluation is an inward judgment about capabilities, competence, and worth. Self-monitoring is an outward flexibility, adjusting behavior to fit external cues, and that difference is what test writers love to probe. So core self-evaluation is the inward verdict a person reaches about their own value and competence, and that verdict shapes how confidently they take on every task. Question 27. Compared with co-workers who doubt their own worth, an employee with a strongly positive core self-evaluation is observed setting tougher targets and sticking with them through setbacks. Which pattern of outcomes is most consistent with positive core self-evaluation? Your options are A. Setting easier goals and abandoning them quickly to avoid failure. B. Setting more ambitious goals, committing to them and persisting longer. C. Avoiding any goals because of fear of disappointing others. D. Performing well only when closely supervised. Before I reveal it, which one do you think is right? The correct answer is B. Setting more ambitious goals, committing to them, and persisting longer. B is correct because people with positive core self-evaluations perform better, in part because they set more ambitious goals, are more committed to them, and persist longer. The employee's tougher targets and persistence through setbacks reflect this pattern. A is wrong because positive core self-evaluation leads to more ambitious goals and greater persistence, the opposite of setting easy goals and quitting at the first sign of trouble. C is wrong because far from avoiding goals, positive CSE people embrace challenge and see more of it in their work. so goal avoidance does not fit. D is wrong because positive CSE people are self-directed and effective without needing constant oversight, so dependence on close supervision is not characteristic of them. A positive core self-evaluation does more than feel good. It predicts real, measurable performance gains. The reason lies in how confident people approach their goals, believing themselves capable and in control. High core self-evaluation people set more ambitious goals, commit to them more firmly, and persist longer when work gets hard. That trio, ambition, commitment, and persistence, is the engine behind their stronger results. The mechanism is a self-reinforcing loop, expecting success. They take on harder goals and persist through setbacks, producing real accomplishments that confirm the original self-belief. A self-doubting employee runs this loop in reverse, setting cautious goals and quitting early, leaving little to build confidence on. The benefits radiate outward: better customer service, greater popularity as a co-worker, more creative solutions, and careers that start stronger and rise faster. Positive self-belief even helps people adapt to career changes and new cultures, boosting performance and leadership in diverse, individualistic team settings. Watch for the hallmark pattern: tougher targets set and stuck to through setbacks, not easy goals abandoned quickly or avoidance driven by fear. In healthy measure, positive core self-evaluation drives performance chiefly by raising the goals people set and the tenacity they bring to reaching them. Question 28. A manager skillfully reads each room she enters and adjusts her behavior to fit, presenting herself quite differently to executives than to her peers. She earns strong performance ratings and is frequently seen as leadership material, though some co-workers find her hard to read. Which attribute does she most clearly display? Your options are A. Low self-monitoring, B. Negative core self-evaluation, C. Low openness to experience, D. High self-monitoring. What's your answer? Commit to one before I continue. The correct answer is D. High self-monitoring. D is correct because high self-monitors are highly sensitive to external cues, adapt their behavior across situations, and often behave very differently in different settings. They tend to receive better performance ratings and are more likely to emerge as leaders, which matches the manager precisely. A is wrong because low self-monitors display their true dispositions consistently across situations and cannot easily disguise themselves, the opposite of the manager who tailors her presentation to each room. B is wrong because negative core self-evaluation involves self-doubt and feeling powerless, which contradicts the manager's confident, high-performing adaptability. C is wrong because low openness concerns a preference for the familiar, not the ability to read rooms and flex behavior, so it does not describe her. Self-monitoring measures how well someone adjusts their behavior to fit external, situational cues. High self-monitors sit at one extreme, showing remarkable adaptability from one situation to the next. The defining quality of a high self-monitor is a chameleon-like ability to read a room and become whatever it calls for. They present one way to senior executives and another way to peers, calibrating tone and style to each audience. High self-monitoring carries real advantages. High self-monitors tend to earn better performance ratings, are more likely to emerge as leaders, are more mobile with more promotions, and are more likely to occupy central positions in their networks. This adaptability means outward behavior is steered by the situation more than a fixed inner script, sometimes creating striking contradictions between a person's public and private selves. The catch is authenticity. Colleagues who notice the shape-shifting may distrust it, wondering which version is real. The high self-monitor wins through situational adaptability, gaining ratings and promotions, while occasionally paying a price in perceived authenticity. Question 29. An engineer refuses to remake himself to please others and behaves the same way in every situation, staying true to his real dispositions whether he is with peers or executives. He is technically capable but politically clumsy and sometimes irritates his supervisors. Which attribute does he best illustrate? Your options are A. Low self-monitoring, B. High self-monitoring, C. Machiavellianism, D. Proactive personality. Pick one. Trust your gut. Here's your chance to test yourself. The correct answer is A. Low self-monitoring. A is correct because low self-monitors cannot disguise themselves and display their true dispositions in every situation, showing high consistency between who they are and what they do. The engineer's unchanging, authentic behavior and political clumsiness match the low self-monitor profile. B is wrong because high self-monitors adjust their behavior to fit each situation and read social cues skillfully, which is the opposite of behaving the same way everywhere. C is wrong because Machiavellianism involves calculated manipulation to get ahead, not authentic consistency regardless of the audience. D is wrong because proactive personality is about taking initiative to create change, which is unrelated to whether someone adjusts behavior to please others. At the opposite end of the scale sits the low self-monitor, someone who cannot easily disguise themselves and instead shows their true disposition in every setting, regardless of the audience. Picture an engineer who refuses to remake himself for any audience. He behaves the same way with peers and with senior leaders, because adjusting his presentation to the room simply isn't something he does. That consistency carries real trade-offs. The low self-monitor gains authenticity and consistency, but often pays for it with political ineptness and missed social cues that would otherwise smooth advancement. The core signature is alignment. For the low self-monitor, the inner self and the outward behavior match, no matter who is in the room, unlike the high self-monitor whose behavior shifts with the audience. Don't confuse this with low-core self-evaluation, which is about self-doubt, not consistency. Remember, the low self-monitor trades adaptability for authenticity, gaining transparency while sometimes losing the political game. Question 30. An employee consistently scans for opportunities others overlook, takes initiative without being asked, and pushes persistently until a real improvement is in place rather than waiting for conditions to change on their own. Which attribute does this describe? Your options are A. Low-core self-evaluation, B. High self-monitoring, C. Proactive personality, D. Emotional stability. Which would you go with? Lock it in before the reveal. The correct answer is C. Proactive personality. C is correct because a proactive personality identifies opportunities, shows initiative, takes action, and perseveres until meaningful change occurs, in contrast to people who passively react to situations. The employee's opportunity-seeking and persistent push for change is the definition. A is wrong because low-core self-evaluation involves self-doubt and feeling powerless, the opposite of the confident initiative described. B is wrong because high self-monitoring is about adjusting behavior to social cues, not about driving change in the environment. D is wrong because emotional stability concerns calmness and stress tolerance, not the tendency to spot opportunities and take initiative. What does it really mean to have a proactive personality? It's a disposition defined by seeking out opportunities and driving change, rather than waiting for change to happen. The proactive person identifies opportunities others miss, shows initiative without being asked, and perseveres until real, meaningful change occurs. This stands in sharp contrast to someone who passively reacts and waits for conditions to improve on their own. This single trait links to leadership, since initiating change is itself a form of influence, and to entrepreneurship, as proactive people are more likely to start their own businesses. It also connects to creativity and to job engagement, the energized, absorbed involvement in one's work. But proactivity isn't universally positive. Dropped into a rigid organization that resists change, a proactive employee's drive for initiative collides with a culture that doesn't want it, breeding frustration instead of progress. The proactive person makes things happen instead of waiting for them, a disposition that fuels leadership, entrepreneurship, and engagement wherever the environment allows it to flourish. Question 35. A researcher explains that the same personality traits showed up clearly in employees' behavior when they worked from home with few rules, but barely affected behavior during a tightly run, formal office meeting. Based on situation strength theory, what general principle does this illustrate? Your options are: A. Personality predicts behavior equally well in all situations. B. Personality traits predict behavior better in weak situations than in strong ones. C. Personality traits predict behavior better in strong situations than in weak ones. D. Personality has no effect on behavior in any situation. Don't overthink it. Which one feels right? The correct answer is B. Personality traits predict behavior better in weak situations than in strong ones. B is correct because situation strength theory holds that strong situations with clear norms and pressures suppress the influence of personality, while weak situations let personality show. So traits predict behavior better in weak situations, exactly as the home versus formal meeting contrast shows. A is wrong because the whole point of the theory is that situation strength changes how well personality predicts behavior, so it does not predict equally well everywhere. C is wrong because this reverses the theory. Strong situations dictate appropriate behavior and suppress personality, so traits predict less well there, not better. D is wrong because personality clearly affects behavior, especially in weak situations. The theory describes when its influence is stronger or weaker, not that it is absent. Situation strength theory explains why personality sometimes predicts behavior well, and sometimes barely predicts it at all. The answer lies in how strongly a setting's norms and cues dictate the appropriate behavior. In a strong situation, like a formal meeting or a tightly regulated job, the right behavior is obvious and enforced, so personality gets suppressed. In a weak situation, like working alone at home, the rules are loose, leaving room for individual dispositions to surface. Picture a researcher comparing employees at home versus in a formal meeting. At home, under few rules, traits clearly shaped behavior. In the tightly run meeting, personality barely registered because the strong norms crowded out disposition. The rule to remember: personality traits predict behavior better in weak situations than in strong ones. Because weak norms let disposition drive conduct, exam writers often test whether you can reverse this correctly. So watch for distractors claiming personality predicts equally everywhere or shines in strong situations. Situation strength governs when traits matter. Weak situations let personality surface and predict behavior, while strong situations suppress it beneath enforced norms. Question 32. In a tightly regulated bank examiner role, employees' freedom to decide and act is sharply limited by external rules, and their individual personalities barely affect how they carry out the work. Within situation strength theory, this role is an example of a strong situation created mainly by which component? Your options are: A. Clarity, B. Consistency, C. Consequences, D. Constraints. Got a guess? Lock it in. The correct answer is D. Constraints. D is correct because constraints is the component describing how much a person's freedom to decide or act is limited by outside forces. A bank examiner role tightly bound by external rules is the textbook high constraint example, which makes the situation strong and suppresses personality. A is wrong because clarity concerns how clear and available the cues about duties are, as with a janitor's well-defined tasks. The scenario emphasizes limited freedom, which is constraints, not clarity. B is wrong because consistency concerns whether the cues about duties are compatible with one another, as with an acute care nurse. The defining feature here is external limitation, not compatibility of cues. C is wrong because consequences concerns how important the implications of decisions are, as with a surgeon. The scenario stresses restricted freedom rather than high-stakes outcomes. Let's dig into constraints, one of the 4 components of situation strength theory. Constraints measure how much outside forces limit a person's freedom to decide and act. Think of a bank examiner tightly bound by rules versus a forest ranger with much more freedom. The examiner's heavy constraints create a strong situation where personality barely shows, while the ranger's looser rules let disposition guide behavior. Constraints don't act alone. Clarity is how available and clear the cues about duties are. Consistency is how compatible those cues are with each other. And consequences is how important the implications of decisions are. As any of these 4 rises, the situation becomes stronger. In a tightly regulated bank examiner role, external rules sharply limit each employee's freedom to decide and act, so individual personality barely affects how the work gets done. This is a strong situation built mainly on constraints. Strong situations aren't automatically good. They can suppress innovation and demotivate, even while curbing bad behavior. And when constraints block a person's natural approach, other traits like disagreeableness can surface instead. So managers must balance control carefully. Question 33. An acute care nurse works in a role where every cue about her duties points toward the same expected behavior, with little contradiction among the demands placed on her. Which component of situation strength does this high compatibility among cues represent? Your options are consistency, B, clarity, C, constraints, D, consequences. Which one is it? Pause the video if you need more time. The correct answer is A, consistency. A is correct because consistency is the extent to which the cues about a person's duties are compatible with one another. The acute care nurse, whose duty cues all point the same way with little contradiction, is the standard example of high consistency. B is wrong because clarity is about how available and clear the cues are in the first place, not about whether they are compatible with each other. A janitor exemplifies high clarity. C is wrong because constraints is about limits on freedom to decide and act, exemplified by a bank examiner, not about compatibility among duty cues. D is wrong because consequences is about the importance of the implications of decisions, exemplified by a surgeon, not about how well the cues align. Situation strength comes from 4 components that all start with the same letter: clarity, consistency, constraints, and consequences. A job can be strong on one and weak on another, so let's understand each before judging overall strength. Clarity is whether duty cues are clear at all, like a janitor's well-defined tasks. Consistency is whether those cues agree with each other, as with an acute care nurse whose duties all point the same way. Constraints limit freedom to act, like a heavily regulated bank examiner, and consequences reflect high stakes, like a surgeon's life or death decisions. The trickiest distinction is clarity versus consistency. Clarity just asks if cues exist and are clear. Consistency asks if those clear cues agree with one another. A role can have vivid, clear cues that still contradict. That's high clarity but low consistency. Exam questions test whether you can match a scenario's detail to the right component. Cues that agree signal consistency. Cues that are merely clear signal clarity. Limits on freedom signal constraints. And high-stakes signal consequences. The four components together build situation strength, but the exam especially rewards telling clarity and consistency apart. Clear cues exist. Compatible cues agree. Question 34. A theory predicts that certain jobs, events, or interventions will switch on a particular personality trait more than others, helping managers foresee which personalities suit which roles. Which theory is this? Your options are A. Situation strength theory, B. Trait activation theory, C. Holland's personality job fit theory, D. Core self-evaluation theory. Take a second. Which answer would you pick? The correct answer is B. Trait activation theory. B is correct because trait activation theory predicts that some situations, events, or interventions activate a trait more than others, which lets managers foresee which jobs suit which personalities. That is precisely the description given. A is wrong because situation strength theory explains how strongly a setting dictates behavior, and thus whether personality shows, not how specific situations switch on particular traits. C is wrong because Holland's theory matches 6 personality types to congruent occupations through interest profiles. It is not about situations activating traits. D is wrong because core self-evaluation is an attribute describing self-worth, not a theory about situations activating traits. Trait activation theory predicts that some situations, events, or interventions activate a trait more than others, while situation strength explains how much a setting dictates behavior overall. Trait activation zooms in on which specific trait a setting switches on. What activates a trait can be a job demand, a specific event, or a deliberate intervention. Even a pay plan or a monitoring system can activate a trait, showing how widely the activating cue can range across the work environment. A detail-oriented job activates conscientiousness. A socially demanding job activates extroversion and agreeableness. An innovation-heavy job activates openness. This lets managers foresee which personalities will thrive in which roles. Activation can cut both ways. Supportive co-workers can activate conscientious tendencies, strengthening duty and information sharing. But electronic monitoring can activate fear of failure, and one study found that combination lowered performance as high-fear individuals felt more apprehension and learned less. The nuance exam writer's test is trait activation versus situation strength. Strength asks how much a setting suppresses personality overall, while activation asks which specific trait it brings forward, turning job trait matches into a planning tool. Question 35. A sales organization introduces a commission-based pay plan and notices that its extroverted representatives become noticeably more driven than its open-minded ones. According to trait activation theory, what is happening? Your options are A. The pay plan is making everyone equally motivated regardless of personality. B. The pay plan is activating openness, which then drives the extroverts. C. The reward-based pay plan is activating extroversion because extroverts are more reward-sensitive. D. The pay plan is suppressing all personality differences by creating a strong situation. Before I reveal it, which one do you think is right? The correct answer is C. The reward-based pay plan is activating extroversion because extroverts are more reward-sensitive. C is correct because trait activation theory holds that a commission-based pay plan activates extroversion because extroverts are more reward-sensitive than open people. That is why the extroverted representatives become more driven than the open-minded ones. A is wrong because the observation is that extroverts respond more strongly than open people. So the plan is not motivating everyone equally. It is activating a specific trait. B is wrong because the trait being activated is extroversion, not openness. Openness is more strongly activated by creative work, not by commission pay. D is wrong because the pay plan is not erasing personality differences. It is amplifying one trait's effect, which is trait activation, not a strong situation suppressing personality. A single change in the workplace doesn't affect everyone equally. It switches on one specific trait, and the people high in that trait pull ahead of everyone else. Commission-based pay activates extroversion because extroverts are especially reward sensitive. Creative work activates openness, calling forward the imaginative thinking those jobs demand. Electronic monitoring activates fear of failure, and that combination can actually lower performance by increasing apprehension. This follows a broader job by trait map. Detail-oriented roles like air traffic controller activate conscientiousness. Socially demanding roles like clergy activate extroversion and agreeableness. Competitive roles like sales activate extroversion while rewarding low agreeableness. And deadline-driven roles activate conscientiousness alongside emotional stability. Exam distractors often claim the plan motivates everyone equally, activates openness instead, or suppresses personality by creating a strong situation. All of these miss the point. Activation targets one specific trait. It doesn't flatten every trait at once. A sales team rolling out commission pay sees its extroverts surge ahead of its open-minded reps. That split is trait activation in action. A single workplace change can light up one trait while leaving the others dim. Question 36. A staffing analyst observes that general intellectual ability predicts performance much more strongly for a complex analyst position than for a highly routine, repetitive job with little discretion. Which principle about intellectual ability does this reflect? Your options are: A. The link between ability and performance is strongest for complex jobs and weaker for highly routine ones. B. Intellectual ability predicts performance equally well for all jobs. C. Intellectual ability matters only for routine jobs, not complex ones. D. Intellectual ability is irrelevant to job performance in every setting. What's your answer? Commit to one before I continue. The correct answer is A. The link between ability and performance is strongest for complex jobs and weaker for highly routine ones. A is correct because the correspondence between ability and performance is strongest for complex jobs and tasks, while for highly routine work with little discretion, a high level of intellectual ability matters less. That is exactly what the analyst observes. B is wrong because ability does not predict equally across all jobs. Its predictive power rises with job complexity, so the equal prediction claim is wrong. C is wrong because this reverses the principle. Ability matters more for complex jobs, not for routine ones. D is wrong because smart people are generally better performers, earn more, and reach higher level jobs. So intellectual ability is far from irrelevant. Ability is a person's capacity to perform the tasks a job requires, and it splits into intellectual and physical factors. Intellectual ability covers thinking, reasoning, and problem solving, and it strongly shapes who performs well, earns more, and gets promoted. But intelligence only pays off when a job actually demands mental work. Think of intellectual ability like a sharp tool. It makes a huge difference on tough material, but barely matters when there's nothing hard to cut through. In complex jobs like analyst, engineer, or manager roles, work involves novel problems and ambiguous decisions. So sharper reasoning translates directly into better performance. In routine, repetitive jobs with little discretion, the tasks are learned and scripted, so extra intellectual horsepower adds little advantage. This is the complexity rule. intellectual ability predicts performance most strongly in complex jobs, and least in routine ones, because the strength of the link depends entirely on how much genuine thinking the job demands. The nuance to remember is the direction of the rule. Intellectual ability isn't equally predictive everywhere, and it isn't more useful for routine work. It predicts performance most powerfully exactly where the job supplies real mental work to do. Question 37. A market researcher studies past sales figures, identifies a logical pattern in the numbers, and uses that sequence to forecast demand for the next period. Which intellectual ability dimension is she primarily using, and how does it differ from its common counterpart? Your options are A. Deductive reasoning, which finds patterns in data, unlike inductive reasoning, which assesses arguments. B. Verbal comprehension, which forecasts demand, unlike perceptual speed, which finds patterns. C. Number aptitude, which finds patterns, unlike memory, which assesses arguments. D. Inductive reasoning, which identifies a logical sequence to solve a problem, unlike deductive reasoning, which applies logic to assess the implications of an argument. Pick one. Trust your gut. Here's your chance to test yourself. The correct answer is D. Inductive reasoning, which identifies a logical sequence to solve a problem, unlike deductive reasoning, which applies logic to assess the implications of an argument. D is correct because inductive reasoning is the ability to identify a logical sequence in a problem and then solve it, which is exactly what forecasting demand from a pattern requires. It differs from deductive reasoning, which uses logic to assess the implications of an argument, such as choosing between two suggestions. A is wrong because this mislabels the dimensions. Finding a pattern to solve a problem is inductive reasoning, not deductive, and deductive reasoning is the one that assesses an argument's logic. B is wrong because verbal comprehension is about understanding words and what is read or heard, and perceptual speed is about spotting visual similarities quickly. Neither describes forecasting demand from a numerical pattern. C is wrong because number aptitude is speedy, accurate arithmetic, and memory is recall of past experience. Identifying a logical sequence to forecast is inductive reasoning, not either of these. Intellectual ability isn't one thing but 7 distinct dimensions, and exam writers love pitting two of them against each other: inductive and deductive reasoning. They sound alike but describe opposite mental moves. The standard account lists number aptitude, verbal comprehension, perceptual speed, inductive reasoning, deductive reasoning, spatial visualization, and memory. Of these 7, inductive and deductive reasoning are the pair students confuse most. Inductive reasoning moves from specific observations to a general pattern or prediction, finding the rule hidden in the data. Deductive reasoning moves from general premises to a specific conclusion, testing what an argument implies. Picture a market researcher studying past sales figures. She spots the pattern in the numbers and projects demand for next period. That's inductive reasoning, moving from observed data to a general forecast. Watch for the signal words pattern, sequence, and forecasting point to inductive reasoning, while logic, premises, and implications point to deductive reasoning. Get the direction right and you'll never mix up this pair again. Question 38. An interior decorator mentally rotates a room and imagines how the furniture would look if its position in the space were changed, or without physically moving anything. Which intellectual ability dimension is she using? Your options are A. Perceptual speed, B. Spatial visualization, C. Verbal comprehension, D. Number aptitude. Which would you go with? Lock it in before the reveal. The correct answer is B. Spatial visualization. B is correct because spatial visualization is the ability to imagine how an object would look if its position in space were changed. Mentally rearranging a room and picturing the new layout is the standard example of this dimension. A is wrong because perceptual speed is the ability to identify visual similarities and differences quickly and accurately, such as a fire investigator spotting clues, not mentally rotating a space. C is wrong because verbal comprehension is understanding what is read or heard and how words relate, which has nothing to do with imagining spatial rearrangement. D is wrong because number aptitude is speedy and accurate arithmetic, which is unrelated to visualizing how a room would look rearranged. Intelligence isn't one single score. Researchers break it into 7 distinct mental abilities, each capturing a different kind of thinking work. Number aptitude is fast, accurate arithmetic. Verbal comprehension is understanding words and how they relate. Perceptual speed spots visual matches quickly. Reasoning handles patterns and logic. Memory recalls past experience. And spatial visualization imagines how an object would look if its position changed. Picture an interior decorator staring at a room, mentally rotating it, imagining how the furniture would look rearranged before touching a single piece. That internal transformation of shapes and layouts without any physical action is spatial visualization. Spatial visualization is easy to confuse with perceptual speed, but they differ. Perceptual speed compares visual details already present, like a fire investigator scanning a scene, while spatial visualization imagines a change of position that hasn't happened yet. Memory, by contrast, simply recalls the past. Watch for signal words like imagine how it would look, mentally rotate, or picture a rearrangement. These mark spatial visualization specifically. Knowing which of the 7 dimensions a task draws on helps match the right person to the right job. Question 39. A retailer wants a quick, inexpensive, and valid intelligence test to screen applicants before interviews. The instrument it chooses takes about 12 minutes, contains 50 questions that get progressively harder, and yields an average score near 21. Which test is this? Your options are A. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, B. The Vocational Preference Inventory, C. The Wonderlic Ability Test, D. The Hexaco Inventory. Don't overthink it. Which one feels right? The correct answer is C. The Wonderlic Ability Test. C is correct because the Wonderlic Ability Test is the most widely used intelligence test in hiring. It takes about 12 minutes, has 50 questions that increase in difficulty, and has an average score of roughly 21 out of 50, providing valid information cheaply. A is wrong because the Myers-Briggs is a personality typology with weak validity, not a brief intelligence test, and it does not produce an average score near 21. B is wrong because the Vocational Preference Inventory is Holland's list of occupational titles for matching interest to jobs, not a timed intelligence test. D is wrong because the Hexaco Inventory measures 6 personality dimensions, not intellectual ability, so it does not fit a 12-minute reasoning test. The Wonderlic Ability Test is the most widely used intelligence test in hiring, and its design is deceptively simple, short, fast, and revealing. It takes about 12 minutes, contains 50 questions that grow progressively harder, and the average test taker scores near 21 out of 50. That combination gives employers a cheap but valid read on reasoning ability. Speed shows up because almost nobody finishes all 50 questions, so how fast someone gets reflects how fast they work. Power shows up because the questions get harder as they go, so how deep someone reaches reflects how tough a problem they can crack. The items themselves mix arithmetic, verbal, and logic problems. A typical question might ask how many feet of rope a certain amount of money buys at a given price per foot, or present a short syllogism testing logical inference. The mix samples several kinds of reasoning rather than probing any single ability deeply. Whenever you see a brief, time test built to measure both speed and difficulty, cheaply delivering valid reasoning data for hiring. That is the Wonderlic, not a personality or vocational inventory. Question 40. An HR director notes that an applicant's overall capacity to perform job tasks rests on two broad sets of factors, and she cautions that one widely used measure of the first set can screen out members of protected groups at higher rates. Which pairing correctly identifies the two sets of factors and the legal risk she is raising? Your options are A. Intellectual and physical abilities, with intellectual ability testing carrying a risk of disparate impact. B. Terminal and instrumental values, with values testing carrying a risk of disparate impact. C. Self-monitoring and proactive personality, with personality testing carrying a risk of faking. D. Clarity and consistency, with situation testing carrying a risk of low reliability. Got a guess? Lock it in. The correct answer is A. Intellectual and physical abilities, with intellectual ability testing carrying a risk of disparate impact. A is correct because ability is a person's capacity to perform job tasks, and it comprises two sets of factors, intellectual and physical. Using intellectual ability tests in hiring can produce disparate impact, screening out members of underrepresented or protected groups, which is the legal risk the director raises. B is wrong because terminal and instrumental values are categories of values, not the two components of ability, and the scenario describes capacity to perform tasks, which is ability. C is wrong because self-monitoring and proactive personality are individual difference attributes, not the two components of ability, and the risk described is disparate impact, not faking. D is wrong because clarity and consistency are components of situation strength, not components of ability, so this pairing does not fit the description of capacity to perform tasks. Ability is a person's capacity to perform job tasks, and it splits cleanly into two components, intellectual and physical. Understanding the split matters because testing for ability can carry serious legal risk. Intellectual ability covers thinking, reasoning, and problem solving, while physical ability covers stamina, dexterity, and strength. No amount of motivation lets someone exceed their actual capacity. So managers must match the relevant ability set to each job's real demands. Ability tests, especially intellectual ability tests, can screen out members of protected groups at higher rates simply because score distributions differ across groups, even with no intent to discriminate. This unintended exclusion is called disparate impact, and it can expose an organization to legal challenge. The prudent response is caution. Use ability measures only where the ability truly matters for performance, and watch whether tests exclude protected groups at disproportionate rates. The same caution applies to physical ability testing. Since score differences, they can create similar discrimination problems. Ability has two parts, intellectual and physical, and testing for it. Especially intellectual testing must be handled carefully to avoid disparate impact on protected groups. Question 41. Research on hundreds of jobs identified a set of 9 basic physical abilities that fall into 3 groupings: strength factors, flexibility factors, and a group covering coordination, balance, and stamina. A fire department wants to match recruits to the physical demands of firefighting. Which set of abilities is most relevant to this matching? Your options are A. The 7 intellectual ability dimensions. B. The 4 components of situation strength. C. The 5 big 5 dimensions. D. The 9 basic physical abilities. Which one is it? Pause the video if you need more time. The correct answer is D, the 9 basic physical abilities. D is correct because the 9 basic physical abilities, grouped into strength, flexibility, and other factors such as coordination, balance, and stamina, are the relevant set for matching people to physically demanding jobs. Physical ability measures predict long-term firefighter performance so they fit the fire department's need. A is wrong because the 7 intellectual ability dimensions concern mental tasks like reasoning and memory, not the physical stamina and strength firefighting demands. B is wrong because the 4 components of situation strength describe how strongly a setting dictates behavior, not the physical capacities needed for a job. C is wrong because the big 5 dimensions describe personality, not physical capacities, so they are not the right framework for matching recruits to physical job demands. Physical abilities are the capacity to perform tasks demanding stamina, dexterity, and strength. Research across hundreds of jobs identified 9 basic physical abilities, and performance rises when a job's physical demands match the abilities of the person doing it. The 9 abilities sort into 3 families. Strength factors concern exerting force, flexibility factors concern bending and stretching, and the other factors cover coordination, balance, and stamina. The 4 strength factors are dynamic strength, trunk strength, static strength, and explosive strength. The 2 flexibility factors are extent flexibility, stretching the trunk and back as far as possible, and dynamic flexibility, making rapid repeated flexing movements. Body coordination, balance, and stamina round out the set, addressing whole body control and endurance rather than raw force. Consider firefighting matching recruits' strength, flexibility, and endurance to the job's demands is exactly what these 9 abilities are built to measure. Remember, physical ability is its own 9-part framework, separate from the 7 intellectual dimensions or the big 5. When a scenario is about matching people to a job's physical demands, think 9 physical abilities, not a mental or personality model. Question 42. A warehouse role requires workers to repeatedly lift and move heavy boxes throughout an entire shift, exerting muscular force again and again over a long period rather than in a single maximum burst. Which specific physical ability does this job demand most? Your options are A. Explosive strength, B. Dynamic strength, C. Extent flexibility, D. Balance. Take a second. Which answer would you pick? The correct answer is B. Dynamic strength. B is correct because dynamic strength is the ability to exert muscular force repeatedly or continuously over time. Lifting and moving heavy boxes again and again across a full shift is the defining example of dynamic strength. A is wrong because explosive strength is the ability to expend a maximum of energy in one or a series of explosive acts, such as a single powerful jump, not sustained repeated lifting. C is wrong because extent flexibility is the ability to move the trunk and back muscles as far as possible, a flexibility factor rather than a strength factor, so it does not match repeated lifting. D is wrong because balance is the ability to maintain equilibrium despite forces pulling one off balance, which is unrelated to repeatedly exerting force to lift boxes. The strength factors are 4 physical abilities that describe how muscular force gets applied, and exams love testing them because their names sound so similar. They are dynamic strength, static strength, explosive strength, and trunk strength. The correct label depends entirely on how the force is applied, repeatedly, against an object, in a sudden burst, or using the trunk. Dynamic strength means exerting force repeatedly or continuously over time, like a warehouse worker lifting box after box for an entire shift. The signature is repetition and duration, not a single maximal effort. Static strength is exerting force against an external object, like pushing or holding something heavy without moving it. Trunk strength specifically uses the trunk and abdominal muscles to generate that force. Explosive strength concentrates maximum force into one sudden burst, the opposite of dynamic strength, steady repetition. So when a scenario describes repeated, continuous effort over time, that's dynamic strength, not explosive, static, or trunk strength. Question 43. An endurance-based job requires an employee to keep up maximum effort that demands prolonged exertion over a long stretch of time. Among the 9 physical abilities, which one is being described? Your options are A. Static strength, B. Dynamic flexibility, C. Stamina, D. Trunk strength. Before I reveal it, which one do you think is right? The correct answer is C. Stamina. C is correct because stamina is the ability to continue maximum effort requiring prolonged exertion over time. A job demanding sustained maximum effort over a long stretch is the definition of stamina, which belongs to the other factors group. A is wrong because static strength is the ability to exert force against external objects, a one-time or sustained push or pull, not prolonged whole effort endurance. B is wrong because dynamic flexibility is the ability to make rapid, repeated flexing movement, a flexibility factor, not sustained maximum exertion over time. D is wrong because trunk strength is the ability to exert muscular strength using the trunk or abdominal muscles, a specific strength factor, not overall endurance. Beyond strength and flexibility, 3 physical abilities round out the full set of 9: body coordination, balance, and stamina. These are sometimes called the other factors because they cover whole body control and endurance rather than raw force. Body coordination is coordinating simultaneous actions of different body parts, like a complex multi-limb movement. Balance is maintaining equilibrium despite forces pulling you off, like working at height. Stamina is continuing maximum effort over a prolonged stretch of time. Stamina is easy to confuse with the strength factors, but the difference is the nature of the demand. Static strength is force against an object. Dynamic strength is repeated force over time, while stamina is sustained maximum effort of the whole system over a prolonged period. The signal words for stamina are prolonged, sustained, and continuing maximum effort over time. When a scenario describes enduring exertion rather than exerting a specific force, that points to stamina. Stamina is whole body endurance over a long haul, one of the 3 other factors that, together with strength and flexibility, complete the 9 physical abilities. Question 44. A manager reviews evidence that performance is highest when a job's physical demands are matched to the abilities of the employee filling it, citing data that physical ability measures predict long-term firefighter performance. Which principle does this best support? Your options are A. High performance results when a job's physical demands match the employee's physical abilities. B. Physical abilities are irrelevant once intellectual abilities are considered. C. Any employee can perform any physically demanding job with enough motivation. D. Physical ability testing should be used for every job regardless of its demands. What's your answer? Commit to one before I continue. The correct answer is A. High performance results when a job's physical demands match the employee's physical abilities. A is correct because even as intellectual abilities grow more important, physical abilities remain valuable, and high performance results when a job's physical demands match the employee's abilities. The firefighter evidence directly supports this matching principle. B is wrong because physical abilities remain valuable and predict performance in physically demanding roles, so they are not made irrelevant by intellectual abilities. C is wrong because motivation cannot substitute for required physical capacity. Performance depends on matching real abilities to the job's demands, not on motivation alone. D is wrong because ability measures should be used only when the ability is genuinely required for the job, not applied to every job regardless of its physical demands. High performance happens when a job's physical demands are matched to the physical abilities of the person doing it. The payoff isn't raw physical capacity in the abstract. It's the fit between what the job requires and what the person brings. Take firefighting, a demanding role where strength, endurance, and coordination genuinely matter. Physical ability measures predict long-term performance because people who score well on these job-relevant abilities are the ones who hold up over time. The demand-ability match doing exactly what the principle claims. Matching beats motivation because capacity sets a ceiling effort cannot exceed. A highly motivated employee who lacks the required ability still can't meet a demand beyond their capacity. Performance depends first on having the relevant ability, and only then on the will to apply it. Exam writers test whether you can spot the real principle among tempting distractors. The correct idea is that performance is highest when physical demands match physical abilities, not that ability becomes irrelevant with intelligence, not that motivation overcomes any gap, and not that every job needs universal physical testing. In practice, managers identify the real demands of a role and select for the specific abilities those demands require. Physical ability pays off not in the abstract, but through a tight fit between job and person. Question 45. Before adopting a strength-based physical test for an office administrative role, an HR team weighs the fact that men tend to score substantially higher than women on physical ability tests. What is the most defensible guidance for using such measures? Your options are: A. Use the physical test for the administrative role to keep standards high. B. Use physical ability tests for all roles to ensure consistency across the company. C. Avoid all hiring tests of any kind to eliminate every possible legal risk. D. Use physical ability measures only when the physical ability is genuinely required for the job. Pick one. Trust your gut. Here's your chance to test yourself. The correct answer is D. Use physical ability measures only when the physical ability is genuinely required for the job. D is correct because men tend to score substantially higher than women on physical ability tests. These measures can create discrimination problems, so they should be used for hiring only when the physical ability is genuinely required for the job. An office administrative role does not require strength testing. A is wrong because applying a strength test to an administrative role, where strength is not required, invites discrimination without job-related justification, so it is not defensible. B is wrong because using physical tests for all roles regardless of need imposes the ability requirement where it is irrelevant, which is exactly the discrimination risk to avoid. C is wrong because the guidance is to use ability tests judiciously when they are job-related, not to abandon all hiring tests, which would discard valid, useful tools. Physical ability tests raise a serious discrimination concern because men tend to score substantially higher than women, which means these tests can screen out women at much higher rates. The guiding rule is restraint tied to job-relatedness. Use physical measures only when the physical ability is genuinely, even absolutely, required for the job. Where strength truly matters, a job-related standard is defensible. Where it doesn't, the test invites discrimination without justification. Picture two roles side by side. A job where strength is truly essential can justify a physical standard, while an office administrative role cannot. And the picture isn't fixed either, since women can improve to meet minimum qualifications through physical fitness training. Exam questions test this exact nuance. the defensible answers targeted use where the ability is genuinely required, not applying strength tests to every role, and not abandoning testing altogether. Like intellectual ability testing, the remedy is the same. Use physical ability measures only when the job genuinely demands them, and watch their impact on protected groups. Question 46. An instructor contrasts two categories of values. One category covers desirable end states of existence, the goals a person hopes to achieve over a lifetime, while the other covers preferable modes of behavior, the means used to reach those goals. Who proposed this two-category distinction, and what are the categories called? Your options are: A. Schwartz proposed it. The categories are self-enhancement and self-transcendence values. B. Rokeach proposed it. The categories are terminal and instrumental values. C. Holland proposed it. The categories are realistic and conventional values. D. Rokeach proposed it. The categories are content and intensity values. Which would you go with? Lock it in before the reveal. The correct answer is B. Rokeach proposed it. The categories are terminal and instrumental values. B is correct because Milton Rokeach argued that values fall into two categories: terminal values, which are desirable end states or lifetime goals, and instrumental values, which are preferable modes of behavior or means of achieving terminal values. That is the distinction the instructor describes. A is wrong because Shalom Schwartz extended values into 10 dimensions and grouped some as self-enhancement, but the specific end states versus modes of behavior distinction is Rokeach's terminal and instrumental categories. C is wrong because Holland proposed 6 vocational personality types, not a theory of values. So realistic and conventional are personality types, not value categories. D is wrong because content and intensity are the two attributes of any single value, not Rokeach's two categories. The categories are terminal and instrumental. Values are basic convictions about what's right, good, or desirable, and they shape attitudes, motivation, and how people see the world. Milton Rokeach argued that values split into two categories and that division is the key idea to master. Terminal values are desirable end states, the lifetime goals a person hopes to achieve. Instrumental values are preferable modes of behavior, the means used to reach those goals. Terminal values, the destinations, include things like prosperity, freedom, health, world peace, and a meaningful life. Instrumental values, the road, include honesty, self-discipline, kindness, and self-reliance, the behaviors that carry a person toward those goals. Rokeach proposed this terminal instrumental pair, while Shalom Schwartz later extended values into 10 broader dimensions, including achievement, hedonism, universalism, benevolence, tradition, and power, tested across roughly 20 countries. Don't confuse the two categories with each other or with the values' content and intensity. Terminal values are the ends, instrumental values are the means, and that contrast is the whole point. Question 47. An employee lists what she most wants out of life, naming freedom, a world at peace, and lasting prosperity as the end state she hopes to reach. In Rokeach's framework, these are examples of which kind of value? Your options are A. Terminal values, B. Instrumental values, C. Content attributes, D. Situation strength components. Don't overthink it. Which one feels right? The correct answer is A. Terminal values is correct because terminal values are desirable end states of existence, the goals a person would like to achieve during their lifetime, with examples such as freedom, world peace, and prosperity. The employee's list of life goals is a list of terminal values. B is wrong because instrumental values are preferable modes of behavior, such as honesty or self-discipline, the means to reach end states, not the end states themselves. C is wrong because a content attribute simply indicates that a mode of conduct or end state is important. It is a property of a value, not a category of life goals. D is wrong because situation strength components, such as clarity and constraints, describe how strongly a setting dictates behavior and have nothing to do with personal values. Terminal values are the desirable end states of existence, the goals a person most wants to achieve during their lifetime. They mark the destination, not the journey. Examples include prosperity and economic success, freedom, health and well-being, world peace, and a sense of meaning in life. Each one names a destination rather than a way of behaving. The defining quality of a terminal value is that it is an outcome, not a behavior. A person doesn't enact freedom or world peace the way they enact honesty. They pursue those states as ends in themselves. Terminal values gain full meaning when paired with instrumental values, the modes of behavior that carry a person toward those ends. A terminal value of well-being might be pursued through the instrumental values of self-discipline and personal responsibility. Ends and means working in tandem. The signal words are end states, lifetime goals, and destinations, with examples like freedom, prosperity, and world peace. Don't confuse them with instrumental values, the behaviors used to reach those ends. Terminal values are the goals a life aims at. Question 48. A mentor advises a new hire to live by certain day-to-day modes of conduct, emphasizing honesty, self-discipline, and kindness as the way to operate. In Rokeach's framework, these are examples of which kind of value? Your options are A. Terminal values, B. Value system rankings, C. Instrumental values, D. Intensity attributes. Got a guess? Lock it in. The correct answer is C. Instrumental values. C is correct because instrumental values are preferable modes of behavior, the means of achieving one's terminal values, with examples such as honesty, self-discipline, and kindness. The mentor's emphasis on day-to-day conduct describes instrumental values. A is wrong because terminal values are desirable end states or lifetime goals, such as freedom or world peace, not the modes of behavior used to reach them. B is wrong because a value system ranking is the ordering of a person's values by intensity, not a category of behaviors like honesty and kindness. D is wrong because an intensity attribute specifies how important a value is, a property of a value, not a category of day-to-day conduct. Instrumental values are preferable modes of behavior, the means by which a person pursues their terminal values. They describe how someone chooses to conduct themselves on the way to their larger goals. Examples include honesty, self-discipline, kindness, autonomy, and self-reliance, and goal orientation. Each names a way of behaving rather than a destination to be reached. Terminal values set the destination, and instrumental values describe the journey. Honesty and self-reliance are behaviors that carry a person toward terminal ends such as self-respect or meaning, which is why the two categories are always defined together. Picture a mentor advising a new hire to live by honesty, self-discipline, and kindness as the way to operate day to day. Those are instrumental values, modes of behavior, not the end state itself. The signal words are modes of behavior, means, and ways of conducting oneself. Don't confuse instrumental values with terminal values, the end states those behaviors ultimately serve. Question 49. A trainer explains that any single value has two attributes, one indicating that a mode of conduct or end state is important and another specifying how important it is. When a person's values are ranked by that second attribute, the result has a specific name. What are the two attributes and the name of the ranking? Your options are A. Terminal and instrumental attributes ranked into a value cluster. B. Content and intensity attributes ranked into a value system. C. Clarity and consistency attributes ranked into a value hierarchy of fit. D. Heredity and culture attributes ranked into a personality profile. Which one is it? Pause the video if you need more time. The correct answer is B. Content and intensity attributes ranked into a value system. B is correct because A values two attributes are content, which says a mode of conduct or end state is important, and intensity, which specifies how important it is. Ranking an individual's values by intensity produces a value system, a hierarchy based on that ranking. A is wrong because terminal and instrumental are the two categories of values, not the two attributes of a single value, and the ranking is called a value system, not a value cluster. C is wrong because clarity and consistency are components of situation strength, not attributes of a value, so this option misapplies those terms. D is wrong because heredity and culture are forces that shape personality, not the two attributes of a value, and the ranking of values is a value system, not a personality profile. Every value has two attributes, and knowing them cold is exactly what exam writers test. The content attribute says a mode of conduct or end state is important, full stop. The intensity attribute specifies just how important it is, which is what settles priority when values compete. When someone's values are ranked by intensity, that ordering is called a value system. Everyone holds values like freedom, pleasure, self-respect, honesty, obedience, and equality, but the system is what decides which one wins when they collide. A person who ranks honesty above advancement behaves differently in a tempting situation than one who ranks advancement above honesty, even though both hold each value to some degree. It's the ranking, not the mere presence of a value, that drives behavior. Don't confuse this pairing with Rokeach's terminal and instrumental values, or with situation strength terms like clarity and consistency. Content and intensity are the two attributes of any value, and ranking values by intensity is what builds the value system that guides behavior. Question 50. A manager proposes assigning tasks based on broad generational labels, assuming baby boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials each hold sharply different work values. Based on the textbook stance, what is the best advice? Your options are A. Embrace the generational labels, since the evidence for large generational value difference is strong and reliable. B. Use generational labels only for older workers who differ most from everyone else. C. Expand the labels into more detailed birth year brackets to make the stereotypes more precise. D. Resist grouping co-workers into generational categories because the evidence for these differences is weak and the practice risks harmful stereotyping and age discrimination. Take a second. Which answer would you pick? The correct answer is D. Resist grouping co-workers into generational categories because the evidence for these differences is weak and the practice risks harmful stereotyping and age discrimination. D is correct because the textbook is openly skeptical of generational categories, advising managers to resist grouping co-workers by generation because the differences are not very compelling, and such categories can lead to harmful stereotyping and potential age discrimination. Resisting the labels is the recommended stance. A is wrong because the evidence for large generational value differences is described as weak, not strong. So embracing the labels contradicts the research. B is wrong because the caution against stereotyping applies to all generational labeling, not just labels for older workers. So selectively labeling one group is not supported. C is wrong because making stereotypes more granular does not fix the underlying problem. The advice is to avoid generational stereotyping, not to refine it into narrower brackets. It feels natural to assume baby boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, and Gen Zers each want different things from work. But the research behind this popular idea is much shakier than most people assume. The evidence for sharp generational divides is weak, not strong. And treating co-workers as stand-ins for their cohort risks harmful stereotyping, plus potential disparate impact toward protected age classes, turning a casual assumption into legal exposure. A key correction is comparing people at the same life stage instead of the same point in time. When millennials and boomers are compared at the same age, they'll often look remarkably similar, suggesting it's youth versus experience driving the gap, not generation. Exam distractors tempt you to treat the labels as strongly proven, to apply them selectively, or to just narrow the brackets. The textbook's actual advice is simpler. Drop generational categories altogether, rather than refining or selectively using them. The chapter's stance is clear skepticism. Generational differences are not compelling, and the labels invite stereotyping and age discrimination. Manage individuals, not imagine generational profiles. That wraps up our question and answer review for Domain 1, Personality and Individual Differences. If you'd like more practice on everything we just covered, head over to our website. You'll find hundreds of free practice questions along with complete study guides all right there waiting for you, ready whenever you need a little extra review. Subscribe so you don't miss the next part, and good luck on your exam.